It began, as so many strange stories do, in a quiet library where nobody expected to find anything unusual. A box arrived in the 1930s, part of a donation from the estate of a wealthy collector. Inside was a single volume, bound in dark leather, with no title, no author, and no date. At first glance, it looked like any other medieval manuscript. The pages were thick parchment, aged but well preserved. The ink had faded to a brownish tone, yet the letters stood out clearly, written in a careful hand. But there was a problem. The script wasn't any known language. Linguists who examined it noticed familiar shapes, curves like Latin, flourishes like Greek, even fragments that looked vaguely Cyrillic. Yet when strung together, the words meant nothing. No translation worked. No grammar matched. It was a language without a home, an alphabet without a key. And then came the whispers. Scholars who spent long nights with the book complained of headaches, of a pressure behind the eyes. Some spoke of vivid dreams, corridors lined with endless shelves, shadowy figures watching from the edges, and always the same book waiting on every shelf. One librarian wrote in her resignation letter, "It speaks when I close it." Another researcher disappeared altogether, leaving only a single note on his desk. The pages are not empty. They are waiting. A hoax? A coded message from a forgotten sect? Or something stranger? Something never meant to be read? Whatever it was, the manuscript earned its nickname quickly. It became known simply as the book without an author. The origins of the manuscript trace back to a private collection. According to library records, it was donated in the 1930s by the heirs of a wealthy Italian collector. His estate was filled with oddities, coins, maps, and volumes of forgotten travelogues. Among them was the book, wrapped in cloth, tucked away in a crate, almost as if it had been hidden rather than preserved. When librarians first opened it, they expected an ordinary medieval text. Instead, they found something deeply unusual. The cover bore no markings, no author, no title, no date. Inside, the parchment pages were strikingly clean for their age, but the writing was unlike anything they had cataloged before. At first, scholars debated whether it was an elaborate cipher. They compared it to codes used by secret societies, to shorthand in lost dialects, even to musical notation. But every attempt to decode it failed. The words looped and twisted, repeating patterns without meaning, like an incantation that no one alive could pronounce. Stranger still, the book seemed resistant to study. One curator noted the pages smelled faintly metallic, almost like ozone before a storm. Another claimed the ink darkened when touched by lamplight, as if the letters were alive. The collector's family offered no answers. In fact, their papers revealed something odd. No inventory of the manuscript existed before his death. No mention of where or how he acquired it. For the librarians, that absence was as unsettling as the text itself. It was as though the book had appeared out of nowhere, waiting for someone to open it. The more experts studied the manuscript, the stranger it became. On the surface, the letters looked familiar. Some resembled Latin curves, others Greek flourishes, even hints of Slavic alphabets. But when combined, the words formed nothing recognizable. No one could find a pattern that fit any known grammar. Linguists first thought it might be a code. Hidden messages were common in old societies. Alchemists, secret orders, even early scientists often disguised their work. But ciphers can usually be cracked. Here, the problem was different. The symbols repeated in cycles, almost like chants, but never translated into meaning. One cryptographer remarked, "It is too consistent to be random, but too meaningless to be a language." Another suggested it might be a forgotten dialect, but no root words matched. A team tried frequency analysis, the method used to break World War codes, but the distribution was wrong. The manuscript didn't behave like any natural language humans have ever spoken. What unsettled researchers more was the rhythm. The words repeated like verses, lines circling back to earlier ones. Some pages contained entire passages that mirrored themselves, as though designed to be read in loops endlessly. It wasn't just unreadable, it was hypnotic. One professor admitted he caught himself whispering the symbols out loud, despite not knowing what they meant. He described it as reading something written in the voice of a dream. The manuscript refused to give up its secrets, and the more it resisted, the more people wanted to know who or what had written it. It didn't take long before the manuscript developed a reputation. The first librarian assigned to study it worked late nights, carefully cataloging each page. Within a week, she reported disturbing dreams. In them, she walked down an endless corridor lined with shelves. On every shelf sat the same book, hundreds, maybe thousands of copies, all open, all whispering without sound. She resigned shortly afterward, writing only, "It speaks when I close it." Another researcher, a young graduate student, tried to prove the text was a hoax. He spent weeks copying its symbols by hand, convinced he would find a pattern. Instead, he grew pale and withdrawn. He complained of a constant pressure in his head, as though the words were pressing back against him. One morning, he didn't show up for work. His notes were still on the desk, filled with frantic circles and arrows. He was never seen again. A third case was more subtle. A linguist who worked on the manuscript fell ill with a strange fever. He claimed that when he closed his eyes, he saw not letters but faces, drawn in the script itself, watching him from the page. He died a few months later. Of course, skeptics dismissed these stories as exaggerations. Scholars under stress, imaginations running wild. But the pattern was difficult to ignore. One book, 3 researchers, and 3 lives cut short or bent out of shape. The manuscript wasn't just unreadable. It was dangerous. If the text was baffling, the drawings inside the manuscript were even more disturbing. Scattered between the looping, unreadable words were full-page illustrations. Some showed plants, but not ones anyone could identify. The leaves twisted into impossible shapes. The flowers were unfamiliar colors, and the roots curled like living hands. Botanists who examined the drawings admitted they resembled no known species, at least none that should exist on Earth. Other pages contained astronomical symbols, stars connected by impossible constellations, moons orbiting the wrong way, diagrams of skies that didn't match any recorded event. One illustration even appeared to show a planet with rings, centuries before Saturn was ever photographed. Then there were the machines. Strange devices drawn in careful detail, as if copied from a blueprint. Some decades, the book's origin was debated without answers. Then, in the mid-20th century, new technology offered a clue. Carbon dating allowed researchers to test fragments of parchment. The results should have solved the mystery. Instead, they deepened it. Several pages dated to the 1400s, late medieval Europe. Others, however, came back much later, closer to the 1700s. A few were even stranger. The ink and parchment didn't match at all, as if they'd been created centuries apart and stitched together into one volume. This suggested one of two things. Either the manuscript was a deliberate forgery, compiled from scraps of older texts to trick collectors, or it was something far more unsettling. One historian pointed out that the handwriting was identical across every page. Whoever wrote it, whether in the 1400s or the 1700s, used the same hand, the same strokes. That shouldn't have been possible. Even more bizarre, chemical tests on the ink showed unusual results. Traces of compounds not commonly used until the 19th century appeared on parchment, supposedly 500 years older. How could a medieval scribe have used materials that didn't exist yet? Some argued contamination. Others whispered about time travelers, secret societies, or knowledge carried across centuries by a single hidden author. Whatever the explanation, the manuscript refused to sit neatly in history. It didn't belong to the 1400s, or the 1700s, or the 1900s. It seemed to belong nowhere at all, with no answers in the archives and no progress from scholars. The manuscript naturally became fertile ground for theories. The most traditional explanation was forgery. Perhaps, critics argued, a clever 20th century hand stitched together old parchment and invented a fake language to fool collectors. But if so, why was the handwriting so uniform across pages separated by centuries? And why risk creating something so deliberately unreadable? Others leaned toward secrecy. Secret societies in Europe often hid their knowledge in codes and symbols. Maybe the manuscript was the ritual text of an unknown order, never intended for outsiders. The looping phrases and mirrored passages, they suggested, were chants or invocations disguised as writing. Then came the stranger possibilities. Some insisted it was a message from another world, a language carried across dimensions. A few even speculated about a time traveler author, someone leaving knowledge of plants, machines, and skies that didn't belong to any one century. Even paranormal researchers weighed in, pointing to the nightmares and disappearances as evidence that the manuscript wasn't just a book, but an object with power. A cursed text, they called it. Dangerous to read, dangerous even to keep. What all the theories shared was one frustrating truth. None of them could be proven. Every explanation raised more questions than it answered. And so the manuscript remained where it had always been, in the shadows of libraries and whispers of rumor. A puzzle that no theory could fully contain. Decades after its discovery, the manuscript remains what it has always been. A puzzle without a solution. Experts have tested it, debated it, and argued over it. But the truth has never come closer. Every attempt at explanation, hoax, cipher, secret society, even messages from beyond time, falls apart under its own weight. The facts resist being pinned down, just like the text itself resists being read. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the book was never meant to be understood, only to unsettle. a mirror for the human mind, pulling us in with questions and leaving us with silence. The most disturbing detail is not what we know, but what we don't. Pages dated centuries apart, yet written in the same hand. Illustrations of plants and stars no one has ever seen. Researchers who whispered about voices and dreams before vanishing from the record. The manuscript does not give answers. It only asks, why was it written? And for whom? Perhaps it's a clever forgery. Perhaps it's an artifact from another age. Or perhaps it's something stranger. Something still waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of forgotten archives. What do you think? Was the manuscript without an author just a hoax crafted to deceive? Or could it be one of history's true forbidden texts? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, some stories don't end. They simply wait